Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to Cult and Classic. I am your host, Nate Wyckoff, writer and comedian, and I am super excited today for our very special guest, Joshua Grannell, also known as Peaches Christ. How are you doing, Joshua?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, especially during these COVID Miss Rona times. It's nice to connect however we can.
Yeah, it's nice to have something to do.
Right, for sure. So I know my wife and I are down here in Palm Springs, and we often go to Moxie and every club down here and see the shows. And we saw Morgan McMichael's last show before the bars officially closed. They were closing that night, and so they had to wrap it up quick. And it was even then, I mean, none of us fully knew the extent of what was going to happen. But already everyone was in gloves, couldn't approach the queens. They couldn't approach us. We had to put tips in a bucket, that sort of thing. Now up there in San Francisco, is anything happening, or is it really just?
Well, we were like we were the first American city to basically shelter in place.
Mm-hmm.
So we were the first to shut down. And I was doing a big show at the Castro Theater that weekend. With Jinx Monsoon and Bindalacram, we were doing my Death Becomes Her parody.
Drag Becomes Her, yeah.
Drag Becomes Her. And it was such a bummer because, one, they're like family to me. We work together all the time. And we had done the show last year in London for 5 weeks. And so we knew the show really well. So rehearsing was fun. But as we were going into the weekend and the news about COVID was getting more and more intense, I have to say I was feeling like, is it up to me to cancel this thing? Like, I have to say, at the end of the day, even though it really sucks financially, it's really been a challenge. I'm glad that London Breed made that decision, knowing everything we know now, like, because if I had moved forward, we had 2 shows. The Castro Theater's 1,400 seats. We were sold out, the 8:00 show. The matinee was selling really well. Like, it just could have been a recipe for disaster. So in hindsight, and yeah, you're right. Like, back then when we closed that first week, we thought we'd shelter in place for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I remember postponing things and then they'd get postponed again. And now I'm kind of like with Drag Becomes Her, it's like 2021.
Right. You've got it like May 21st, I think, right? Is the rough.
Right.
Rough guess.
That one, I don't even know at this point because it's just anyone's guess. Yeah.
Well, and especially when you have something that needs a stage and a crew, it's not just you that's getting pushed back. It's every single production, every single rental, everything they have, right? It just goes way back. And I'm noticing that as a stand-up comic too, I mean, it's the same thing as drag queens, right? We're doing digital shows on occasion, but it really, especially for something like your show Midnight Mass and your other shows, like anything like that, I mean, it's really difficult via the online platform to get that kind of experience.
It's not something we can recreate virtually. I am considering for the first time ever airing videos of our shows online. People have asked for years and years, where can I see, Drag Becomes Her, Legally Black, or, Sheetlejuice or whatever. And it's like, I guess I'll finally, and that's more about a financial necessity. I hate to say, like, it might just, pay for our storage units and, kind of keep the company up and running. But I will, nothing can replace being at the show, seeing the show live. Yeah. So I've sort of accepted it after some, depressing, banging my head against the wall. And so now I'm working with my production company, Into the Dark, where we already do immersive theater and haunted attractions. And I'm kind of setting my sights on reopening that show first because we can put small groups through at a time.
Yeah.
We can mask the audience as part of the narrative. We can mask a lot of the actors, and so we're looking at maybe that for like March, but traditional theater, I don't think it's coming back anytime soon. However, the other thing I'm doing is looking into with another company, creating an outdoor venue. So
I saw some little bits of that sneaking out in some of your stuff lately.
Yeah. So hopefully that comes through, because I think, I'm trying to convince some folks, like, yes, this investment will be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, I think we're going to be in this for a while.
Yeah, it's and I obviously podcasts, we're remote generally anyway, but
Right.
it's hard to stay positive when you can't. Even someone like me who pretty much is happy. My wife says I'm happy shut in a room with my stacks of movies and comics and art supplies and whatever and laptop and just go. And I can do that for months. And I'm like, okay, well, I've about found my limit. 4 months is pretty much that it,
Yeah.
So I was looking through you really have a huge catalog of sort of material
stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of unique for a lot of drag performers to have that, it's a very ephemeral art, right? You do it every night and you're in a club, and yes, photographs. Yes. You drop a song, maybe it gets in the clubs, things like that. But really, it's the performance. And you've actually, because of your background in film, you went to Penn State, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because of your background in film, you've got short films, mockumentaries, documentaries, and because you've been so successful in the San Francisco area, I think you had a truly California short segment, I think, done about you.
Yeah.
And which is kind of cool. I didn't, to be honest, I didn't know it reminded me of the Heritage Moment, the Canadian thing that they do. And I didn't even realize that we had that kind of thing. So that was neat. But there's actually a lot of material out there. What is that is that intentional?
No. So I'm in this weird position now where I'm asked to teach. I've actually gotten to teach at the San Francisco Art Institute, or I'm asked to, talk to young people and give advice. And, it's this thing where it's like, honestly, I just followed what interested me. And, I was a kid who, grew up obviously loving horror movies, loving spooky stuff, macabre stuff, discovered John Waters at a young age. I grew up in Maryland. I was obsessed with Rocky Horror. I wanted to make movies. I made haunted attractions. I did theater. So everything that, like, my friends who knew me as a kid, like, think I'm hilarious at 46, because they're like, you are the same. Like, everything I do and all the stuff that I'm into, drag and horror and all this stuff, it's stuff I've loved since I was a kid. And so I really didn't set out to have a career in drag. That was an accident. Performing when I started was a hobby and something fun to do. And, I spent more money doing it than I made. I actually thought I would make money maybe working on movies or making movies. And I moved to San Francisco because, I had met John Waters, and, he was my idol, and we hadn't become friends yet. But at this sort of like meeting, when I was very, very young, he told me about the Coquettes, and he told me about the Kuchar brothers and Canyon Cinema and sort of the underground world of San Francisco. And it sounded so fascinating. So I came here after just, graduating from film school, and, just put one foot in front of the other. And in doing Peaches Christ was very much like an angry response to a Catholic kid who was now a queer activist and wanting to be punk rock and in your face. The numbers were all very gory and sacrilegious and kind of maybe like heady and serious and obnoxious in a way. I used to have, chainsaws.
You're still growing into that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think about it now, it's like, some of that I took maybe more seriously than I ever should have. I still always had a sense of humor about it all, but like, it was something that accidentally turned into a show called Midnight Mass, where I got to screen cult movies at a movie theater and have a midnight series. And that was really so selfish. Like, it was so me wanting to do that. Like, me being in a projection booth and building up prints, going home, putting on drag, coming back, doing a show, screening a cult movie. You know,
Yeah, you're talking to a podcaster. We get self-indulgent.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and so the fact that it turned into a business was almost incidental. And like, you know, I always say, like my friend Heckelina, she's always put business first, and it shows. She really built this sort of empire. She was able to open a nightclub. I've always, and I think you can be successful either way. I've always put my passion first and sort of my whatever interests me first. Now, as a business person, that's not always the smartest thing to do. You know, I haven't always made the smartest decisions. But I think because I was always doing stuff I loved, you know, people find you and they love it too. And, you know, that, so anyway, it was all an accident. And I look at it the same, like whether I'm making a movie or putting on a stage show or putting it on an immersive theater production, a haunted house or whatever, it's all coming from the same place for me, which is this sort of spirit of showmanship that I just love, and storytelling. And so, you know, people go, oh, how do you jump from making a movie to doing this? And I'm like, for me, it's basically all kind of the same.
It feels like the same, you know, outlet, the same.
It does.
You know, and really, I mean, it sort of sounds like it solidified you into this brand, right? I mean, whether you want to call it that or not, it's like, it's hard not to see something that has Peach's face on it and not just get the whole impact. You know, I think of the music, I think of Give Me $10, you know, I think the whole deal. And I watched today, my wife and I was brushing up on all of the bits and pieces that I've collected from you over the years, because I've tried, and this is what I'm going to call you out on. You do not have enough product out there for those of us that aren't in the San Francisco area.
True.
It's like,
that's true.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, we met very briefly. There's no way in the world you would remember. But at the LA Film Festival when All About Evil screened.
Okay.
The film blew me away. That was 2010, I think, is when you first, and it was, you had a great cast. It was shocking. And I remember you talked about this, I think, during the, either before or after the premiere. I think you said something like, people would ask me, and this isn't Peach's film. This is my film. This is Joshua's film. And it really, truly felt like something more than just a love letter. Because you hear that from people a lot. Like, oh, my film was a love letter to, you know, the drive-in theater, you know, the Russ Meyers, the whole deal. But it was not just nostalgic. It was a great film.
Oh, thank you.
And I say that just because, and I was lucky enough to get a copy of the DVD as soon as it went up on your site.
Oh, good.
I watch, and that's, of course, we will be covering it by the time this airs. People will be able to listen to the Cult and Classic episode where we talk about it and RuPaul's Star Booty. And when you made All About Evil, was there any pushback from the people around you who you work with every day? Because making a film, especially one that's as polished and refined as that, it's a lot different than an interactive stage show, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, and if you've seen any of my older shorts and stuff, like, I think, you know, one of them's the short that was All About Evil called Grindhouse is on the DVD. And, you know, I made those shorts for like no money. We made them in a weekend. They were so scrappy. And I think a lot of people really appreciated that about my little world, that, you know, I had this little cast of characters, and, you know, it was kind of like any cult thing or any niche thing. Like, there was definitely an audience of people, and you'll still hear this, like, especially with relationship to the shows at the Castro, because they're big, and, you know, they have like RuPaul's Drag Race stars in them, and, you know, they're sometimes more popular. And I'll hear fans say, I miss Midnight Mass. I miss the old shows at the Bridge Theater. And there was some of that with All About Evil as well, you know. But with All About Evil, I think maybe less so. I feel like there was this part of San Francisco especially that was just so excited to see me do something that was like with, you know, people that I idolized, you know, like Mink Stoll and Cassandra
Peterson as my crush since I was 2 years old. You know, I saw Elvira on the TV and I was like, who is this person? You know, this is amazing. And ever since then, you know.
And, you know, I had to really talk her into doing the movie. Like, at the time, she had done very little. In fact, she hadn't really appeared in a movie outside of Elvira drag since Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So, you know, Yeah,
And
when
even in Elvira drag, she was in Haunted Hills, and then she did a couple of the commentary ones, and that's it.
right, yeah. So she didn't, she'll say it like, "Oh, he bullied me into doing it," but it was more like sending her really, really gushy, letters, because we were friends at that point. We had
Right.
worked together. Whereas Mink Stoll said yes right away. She said yes before she read the script, and I was a little bit nervous about that because, of course, then she found out that we were going to sew her mouth shut and do all this stuff, and
Debatably the most gruesome scene in the film.
yeah, I think so. And even with that being like an obvious prosthetic, it was all practical, and all the effects in the movie are practical. So when Natasha
so good, yeah.
was doing it, they had shown her exactly where to put the needle in and where it could go. And I'm looking at the monitor, and we're all kind of holding our breath because if Natasha went like even a little bit
right.
the wrong way, it was really, so even me watching it still today, I'm kind of like, even though it's obviously a prosthetic, but it's still close enough that it makes people squirm.
Yes.
Yeah. So having those sort of stars, I think if I had done something where there weren't those sort of like authentic heroes from the cult movie scene, intermixed with, a Hollywood actor like Natasha Lyonne
or Thomas Dekker.
Especially, I think because Natasha's Natasha, when I wrote the movie, and I was picturing that character, I of course kept picturing a young Sissy Spacek or like a young I don't know, like Shelley Duvall, someone who doesn't, like a 70s actor where you could have a pimple and it was okay. And, you didn't have to be some A-list beauty. Of course, when we were casting All About Evil, and the casting director and the financiers and everybody are spitting names out at me, they wanted all these kind of like, I don't know, like cliched female leads,
Right.
And finally,
they really put together the flippable teen pop star, Hollywood star, like the same kind of vibe, right?
Exactly. And I didn't want that at all. And finally, I remember the director of photography, Tom Richmond, who's so talented and so fantastic, when an actor that we thought was going to play Deborah, he said, who have you not gone for that you wanted to? And I said, well, number one on my list has always been Natasha Lyonne, but there's no way she'd ever do it. And he was like, well, how do you know that? He shot Slums of Beverly Hills. So he calls her on the phone with me in the room, says, I'm sitting here with this director, Peaches Christ, here you go. And he put me on the phone with Natasha, and then we started talking, and I told her, though you'll appreciate this, I told her what the film was about, and I said I was inspired partly by this woman named Doris Wishman, and Natasha goes, bad girls go to hell.
Right.
And I'm like, I said, you know who Doris Wishman is? And Natasha goes, yeah, my mom, she was my mom's neighbor down in Florida. And
that's crazy.
I'm a big, I love her. Like I've seen her, she's the only woman exploitation filmmaker. I said, oh my God, Natasha, you have to read my script. Then it gave me this confidence, right? Like, and I remember saying to her, as soon as I knew she knew who Doris Wishman was, then it was like, I couldn't not have her be the lead,
Well, and it's funny because, I think right now, even a lot of cult fans, when they think of Natasha Lyonne, they think, Orange is the New Black, because that was really the huge push that brought her into the mainstream. And now, of course, she has Russian Doll and a lot of projects.
Right.
But like you said, Slums of Beverly Hills, it was, she's never not been a force on screen, like her personality is absolutely impossible to keep off camera.
But I'm a cheerleader, she was on Pee-wee's Playhouse as a child.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, she's like one of those and she and Thomas really bonded a lot because they both were child stars. And, admittedly, as we all know, there's baggage that comes with that. So it was really cool as a family, like on set, especially for Natasha and Thomas, like they really bonded over growing up in the industry. But by the time I was like casting this movie, it was like Natasha had already been in Slums of Beverly Hills, But I'm a Cheerleader. Of course, she was in the American Pie movies, but also Party Monster, like Die Mommy Die. Like she had already worked with a drag queen, writer director, with Charles Bush. So I just thought you know, it was just, she was perfect. She was so cool,
Mhm.
you know. And then of course, right after All About Evil, I'll never forget, she told me, I'm doing this show, this TV show. And I thought, oh, that's good. And she said it was for Netflix. And I thought, oh, poor thing.
So did we all. So did we all.
Isn't that hilarious? I mean,
Yes.
because Netflix was still like, you know, the place where they sent you DVDs in the mail or whatever.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so she says she's doing this, you know, this show. And, you know, what's her name who did Weeds, you know, who was doing Orange is the New Black.
Yep.
You know, there was some sort of maybe link to All About Evil, you know, and so it was this great thing where we felt like, oh, Natasha, she got this job, and you know, but it's Netflix. And then Natasha told me that Laverne was on the show, and
Mhm.
you know, and it's still in my mind. It's like, oh, it's just gonna be this little thing, and you know, of course, you know, it just goes to show you never know. You know,
That's totally true. And I think too, for people who love horror movies and Grindhouse and the whole deal, the idea of again, that ephemeral thing where there's nothing tangible that we get, you know, it was hard to foresee, you know,
Right.
the advent of streaming. And here I am on talking to you on a podcast. It seems hilarious, but it's true.
Right.
You know, I mean,
On Zoom.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, who still, you know, my Instagram feed, I would hazard to say most of the listeners of this podcast are VHS fanatics. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like
right.
that concept. And then you go to find something like, I was resistant myself to things like Netflix. This isn't going to work. No one wants to do that.
Right.
And now, of course, I'm just grateful. I just interviewed Donald Farmer for this a little bit ago. And of course, his movies now, they all stream first.
Right.
It's
right.
you know, some of them don't even get a physical release. And it's
I mean, it's definitely just completely changed. I mean, I made a movie about making movies in a cinema, you know, because I'm that obsessed with movies in cinema. I lived in cinemas. I do my shows in cinema, my drag. But, you know, as much as I am fighting to save every single screen theater we can, and I am still fighting, and I'm still a huge proponent of exhibition. You know, the projects I've been working on, you know, the past year are a docuseries for streaming, a TV pitch for streaming. I mean, it's still very me, right? And then another feature film. But you know, when I made All About Evil, I'm really glad I made it when I did, because my dream was to screen it in cinemas.
Yeah.
And you know, Mark Cuban and Landmark Theaters, they gave me this opportunity to do a William Castle style cross country tour, you know, which we did, where we went to all the different cities and Peaches, and sometimes it was Natasha, sometimes it was Cassandra, whoever, but we did a whole show, you know, that opened the movie, and that's how the movie was sort of presented in theaters. We wouldn't even be able to entertain that today.
Right.
There's not enough cinemas left. And that was only 10 years ago.
And it's the same sort of weird thing where my wife and I were talking about this, because she's very much, you know, well, I like watching movies at home. You know, I mean, why, like, we don't have to leave. And I'm like, and I do too. I watch movies all the time.
Right.
But I also am obsessed with the theater. You know, it's the one place where I can go that I literally cannot do anything else but be lost in that movie. And
you can have fellowship with strangers without ever even talking. Like, there's this collective energy. I mean, I hate to sound all woo-woo about it, but you know, comedy, laughter, all that stuff. I mean, you know, as well as I do, like performing for your computer screen, comedy it's really tough. You know, it's like, I'll be dressed as Peaches and I'm doing a show, or, you know, and I know there's an audience out there, but when you can't hear them and you can't see them, you know, it just, and I think it affects the way we see movies as well. Like, you can't watch The Human Centipede at home alone. You know, you need to watch it at midnight in a movie theater with people vomiting, you know.
Right. Even you know, I try and on Cult and Classic have a really good mix of friends who are film buffs and other people who maybe have really narrow interests, and a few people who really haven't seen the kind of movies that we're going to show them, because I think it makes for an interesting conversation. Everyone brings their own point of view that is uniquely independent, and I think listeners can follow those different trains and get new ideas and probably appreciate things more than they maybe would otherwise. But at the same time, there are movies that I adore that sending them a digital copy and them watching in the living room, their experience is so undefinably different than when I saw it, in a crowded theater throwing spoons at the screen. You know what I mean? Like, and my wife, when we were in college together, she was a devoted Rocky. She was in every production from the Players Society of Rocky every year, the gender swap one, the whole deal. She played Rocky. And that sort of thing, it's really the technological. I'm glad we have streaming. I'm glad we have the Zoom capability. It's been a lifesaver during the pandemic, but it's really a neutered form for me because, like you said, there's no feedback. And I think as performers, at least for me, it is a very selfish need for approval that keeps me going. And when you don't get that, when you can't read it in other people, it feels like bombing every night, even though you're like, people ask you back.
Yeah, and it's contagious. That's the other thing. Like, doing the immersive haunted attraction, all we need is a screamer in every group. And the group then just screams and has fun. When you get 8 non-screamers, they go through the show and they watch it differently, right? So it's the same thing with comedy or horror. It's like laughter is contagious, so you just need a couple good laughers in an audience to sort of break the ice. But when you're at home, and you don't have that, I don't know, there is an energy to it that you can't, and that's why I'm actually not worried about the other side of the pandemic, because, a lot of people are saying, like, is this the death of theater? And it's like, actually, theater has survived through all of this. It's survived pandemics before,
The Spanish influenza had theater during it. In fact, they only had theater. So and we had theater on the other side. So, I do think that need to gather, that need to be together and see cinema or see plays or go to sporting events or whatever it is, like, worship, go to church. For me, movies are kind of my fellowship. I think that's going to, it's the same thing with AA meetings being online and all of this. Like, as soon as people can be back in rooms with each other, they're going to need that. So, we just have to kind of like white knuckle it. Yeah. I think you're right. And it's, and I'm a huge thrift store, Goodwill, swap meet. I mean, that's what, it's what feeds my obsessions,
You're in the right town.
I am, absolutely. I have never been so grateful for dead people in my whole life.
It's the best thrifting ever. All those queens down in Palm Springs, I mean, they go down there to retire, and then when they pass away, some of the stuff you can pick up. I mean, I hate to, but it is true. Like, there's a lot of guys down there with incredible taste that, like,
100% true.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do.
It sounds morbid, but I'm kind of like, oh no, the best thrifting is Palm Springs.
I cannot tell you how many times I've been pushed out of the way by a couple of retired gay men who I'm like, I was destined not to have that chair set because they saw it from the parking lot,
Right.
But no, it really is. And right now, I mean, clubs, you stud closed, up there in San Francisco, and it's really scary. And before this, we lived in Huntington Beach and Orange County, which I swear to God, I love Orange County, and I don't mean to offend any of our friends and my listeners who live in Orange County, but it really is the Jersey Shore of California right now.
Right.
And the resistance to protecting each other is mind-boggling, because especially down here, and I live in the Cove, so it is, my wife and I are one of the few heterosexual couples in the area. And a lot of the people around here, they were saying to me, they were like, well, I remember the AIDS pandemic. Like this, we know that the thing is real, and we're going to treat it with respect, and we're older and this is going to happen. So it's definitely a different vibe. Whereas like, our family in Orange County, visiting them, it's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm staying 6 feet away. Like, what are you doing?
It is, it's like living. I think it's strange when you love horror, you love spooky stuff, even the show that we're working on for the immersive attraction, I'm going way more, in the last 2 years, the theme has been more hardcore horror. It's like visiting a prison when you go to the San Francisco Mint building, which is where we have it. Whereas this year, or next year, whenever we get to do it, I've written a whole new thing where it's a family who's used the San Francisco Mint to house their occult, antique collection and
That's great.
artifacts. But it's way more fantastic. It's way more, and I'm realizing part of my attraction to the sort of the magic is that there's enough horror like all around us.
I can't even, I mean, yeah. It's like looking at,
strange.
I swear it's every time I open my phone, there's a new person to be mad at. There's a new reason to be upset. There's a new conversation that, now we have to have this, which it's good in the long run potentially, but that's so far off. It's hard for me to see it, Well,
it's like the bigger horror is sort of realizing that we are living in, this is my perspective, like growing up, I'm 46, growing up a kid in the 80s, you were delivered this huge lie that's kind of indoctrinated into you that you are so lucky to live in the best country in the world, and that we are better than everyone, and that this country is number one, and everything we've done is so great, and let's not really talk about slavery, and racism is over, and
we're past that, right?
We're just just indoctrinated and socialized in this way that, like, I think with this presidency and this pandemic, and with the cell phones capturing murder after murder after murder of Black people, the chickens have come home to roost, and the horror is, oh my God, especially for Gen Xers like myself, and
same,
like I think we're it's like generation above us. I just feel like sometimes like these Orange County people, whatever, they're just like living in denial or something. But we're really opening our minds to stuff that young people have known, right? Like, we're fucked. This is horrifying. And it's so much uglier than I ever thought it would get,
For sure. Well, and it's with that thing, especially as a 36-year-old middle-class white guy, straight white guy. It was like, it felt like first it was, oh, wow, the LGBTQIA, like, when you don't have a problem and you don't even know that there is a struggle for equal rights, when that becomes apparent, I think for a lot of us, it's college and around, or for film, when we find film and we see this and we understand it's shocking. And then you think you make it past that hurdle and that you're an ally and you're aware. And then you see your friends of color and your BIPOC friends be like, oh, that happens all the time. Didn't you hear me for the last 30 years? And the answer is no, I didn't, what I mean? And it's a terrible failure of not just the system, but I think of our awareness, we're naturally self-absorbed in that way, right? Like the struggles of the world are the ones I have to go through. And then I learned that there's tons of others that have it far more difficult that I didn't know. And it's more horrifying. I think it goes to what you said. It's more horrifying to realize not that it's happening, but that it's been happening. Right. And that it's like, sure, it's worse in some ways because we have, people claiming riots and excuses for more violence and things like that. And a president who, absolutely condones this kind of behavior and enforces it. But realizing that it's just that terrible for so many people. And I have, been focused on other things. It's truly shaming.
It's like, I mean, I totally agree. And I grew up, becoming a queer activist, and I was a women's studies minor in college, and certainly thought I was, aware of my white privilege. But I think about things like when the O.J. Simpson trial, took place, and I remember when the verdict came down, I was in college at Penn State, and it was literally like all the white students were like, and the Black kids were cheering.
Right.
And I remember then thinking, wow, there's a deeper divide here than I knew. And I wanted to understand it, and of course I had Black friends and all of that, but it definitely, it's sad that it took what it took, but it still is not enough for some people, camera footage of these murders and cell phones. I mean, it's sad that it took all of that, but I think so many of us just didn't want to believe that the police were
dangerous. It's inconvenient.
It's a horrifying reality, but now it's like, I think one good thing about this whole administration and this, situation we're in is like, you're either on one side or the other.
Yep.
At this point. It's like, I'm sorry, but there's no way that you can support Trump and not be a white supremacist. Like,
and that's
no
true.
way.
And you look at my father was a fiscal conservative Republican, and my mom was always a socially liberal Democrat. And the fights that would happen in my house around any election were truly epic. It would be my mom saying, if you vote, I swear to God, I'm moving. I'm taking Nathan and I'm moving.
That's funny. You and I have very similar, the exact same dynamic.
And I mean, it's a relief that my dad has, before the Donald Trump election, was really having trouble calling himself a Republican anymore because he didn't believe in the things that were coming out and the dog whistles that became, I mean, people say, well, this is a dog whistle against, for racists. And I'm like, no, it's overt. We're choosing to make it a dog whistle at this point, because it's really out there. And it's true. There are people that, I'm at a loss for words sometimes with people that I love and care about, that you see doing things and saying things, especially online, because it's such an open forum, that you're like, I cannot fathom how you love me and treat me well. But you can tell people that this other group of people are thugs or murderers, or they're not worth it, or it's their fault that they're in these situations. And I don't know how to handle that all the time. And I think, we see celebrities do it, and often, myself included, we read them for it. Oh, this comedian did that, and you're not writing them off instantly. Right. How could you not? And the answer is, I think it's really hard when there are people close to you. And that's what I think is happening, is we're all getting hit close to home in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, one exciting thing in the world that, you and I are interested in and grew up in, is that there's finally change. Because if you look at horror as a genre, when I was growing up, and I would go to like a Fangoria convention or whatever, it was white and it was straight and it was predominantly male. And like, that's the way it was. Those are the guys who got to make the movies. Those are the guys that got to edit the magazine. I'm not saying that they're all bad. In fact, many of those people were heroes of mine. Wes Craven, Tobe Hooper, John Carpenter, all of them. But like, you did not see queer people and you did not see people of color. And that's just the way it was. And I remember when I was finally successful enough as Peaches, and I don't say this as a bragging thing, but I really was maybe the first real horror drag queen, as far as pushing horror and doing horror stuff. And I would go to a convention with Elvira. I remember once going to Horror Hound in Indianapolis. Yeah. And like, literally, I was the scariest thing there to a lot of the attendees.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
They could not figure out what I was doing there. Yeah. And they knew I was not a woman. And, there's people walking around with chainsaws and severed heads. And these guys were so freaked out by me. And Cassandra, Elvira, thought it was hilarious,
I'm sure.
But, I felt very like pissed. Like, I wanted to queer it up. I wanted to, and
like, hey, this is my community too.
Yeah, like, I love it too. Like, I'm a fan too. And guess what, you guys? Like, this person over here, Frank Henenlotter, like, you might want to look into, where some of this stuff is coming from. Like, Alfred Hitchcock, Norman Bates, like, let's there's queerness all around you. Right. You're just not open to seeing it, right? And so lately, I feel like, finally, Black folks and people of color and women have finally, and queer people have finally been given, more of a real seat at the table as far as cult movies and horror stuff goes. And more specifically horror. I mean, I think with cult movies, queerness, luckily, with always John Waters and
it's all about the fringe. And so when you're marginalized in society, that's a place where everybody sort of funnels into, it's the matte shot of the cinematic world, Yes, exactly. And that's, I think, why so many of us love it. But like you said, with horror films in particular, which makes up such a large percentage, it really is, I review for horrornews.net. I tend to review their lowest aggregate review films,
Right. Okay.
and they're often my favorite. You know, there's a reason that I do that job.
Yeah.
But there are so many cases where you get something that I'm like, this is not. It's not so much an homage as a misunderstanding of it, and it's usually in the form of what comes out as anti-women or anti-LGBTQIA material, and
Right.
it's sort of like that sense of victimization is no longer a fantasy, and it feels like a concerted message.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate because you see those at conventions too. You know, I'll be there and I'll be like, oh, this is great, and then I go and I end up talking to someone, and I'm like, oh, you're one of the ones that's in here for the reason that does concern me and does concern people. And I'm sure you get that as sort of a public figure with fans. You know, there are a lot of people looking for, as you say, idol worship. And sometimes you don't really want those people there. You want to be inclusive. But I mean, how do you handle, I'm assuming you've had real strong misinterpretations of what you put out there, because it's sort of, you can't control it, right?
Yeah, I think that so much of the Peaches message, especially when in relationship to like the cult sort of parallels and things, is so tongue-in-cheek that most people get it, and then and then beyond that, I'm pretty open to, you know, pretty addressing it or saying, you know, we are the outsiders, we're the freaks and the weirdos, and everyone is welcome. Where it's gotten tricky is usually someone maybe who's suffering from some mental illness or something along those lines. Knock on wood, it hasn't been an issue lately, but I think back, especially when it was rarer for there to be a horror drag queen, you know, I would say more like 10 years ago, it was more common. And in fact, this is another thing that I've spoken to Cassandra about, and Mink, and you know, other friends, where, you know, because we're strange and we're odd and we're dark and we stand for something alternative and cult, sometimes people assume we're speaking directly to them in this very personal way that other mainstream celebrities, they don't feel that connection to, because we're niche and we're bizarre. So when I've had misunderstandings, I mean, a lot of times, sadly, I think it's because someone's kind of broken and you know, and so you know, there've been a few little strange interactions, you know, scary moments, you know, but nothing too serious.
Well, and that's always good. And I think you really touch on it with most of us who have, and this is being really grandiose of me to include myself in this in any way, but when I've done things like readings or things like that, where I've been, or shows, you know, comedy shows where I've come off stage and people often think, you know, probably similarly to a drag queen, I'm an exotic animal. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you were up there and now you're down here.
Right.
Those interactions can be uncomfortable, and someone does sort of misunderstand the boundary and the fact that I'm just a person. You don't really want to talk to me. You want to talk to that guy.
Right.
Like that's not me. I did a show for you. The show's over. I'm glad you came and enjoyed it.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've noticed that for me as Peaches, I come off the stage and then I still have to be Peaches.
Yeah.
So it's that thing where some people go, oh, I want you to come to my party as Peaches. I want you to come to my wedding as Peaches. It's like, you don't get it. Like, that's a job for me. If I dress up and I'm Peaches and I'm talking to your guests all night, I'm cracking jokes. I'm still on stage. I'm still in a spotlight. It's exhausting. Those fan meet and greets that we do after the show are much more tiring than the show itself, because the show is scripted. It's fun. You're doing it with your friends. When you're giving someone all of your attention and your energy and you're in character, you know, that drains you. So when I've been Joshua and I come off the stage, I know exactly what you're talking about, where I'm almost like, I am awkward. I'm a nerd. I'm introverted. I'm strange. So Peaches is in many ways an armor for me. It's a way for me to perform. And as Joshua, when I take it off, I think people are surprised by how small my circle of friends is, and how boring my life actually kind of is. I don't really go out very often. I'm not very social, and so I save a lot of that energy for those bigger performances or whatever.
I think I watched A Wig and a Prayer, the Peaches Christ story, the short, and it you talked about that a little bit, and I thought it was interesting that you're like, I don't want to use the word home buddy, but you're like, no, I don't go out really. Like this is my outing. And as and when I sang that I sang for a band, the Chud, for like 10 years.
Cool.
And actually they do the music for this show, and by they I mean I was the vocalist, so I had the least amount of musical ability of the entire fantastic band. And the outro song that we use for this podcast is actually a song that that we wrote after All About Evil. It's called uncreatively All About Evil, but you'll get to hear that.
I love it.
You haven't heard it yet, but no, I'm just kidding. But it's one of those things where that when I'm on stage, it's so freeing and so wonderful, and it's part of stand-up comedy too. It's like me at a different level,
right?
But I don't know if it's because that is where I spend it all, or if it's just that allows me to be that way. And then when I'm off, no, I didn't go drink at the parties. You know what I mean? Whenever I did, it was an obligation. You know what I mean? It's not what I wanted to do. But I almost, for me, and I don't know if you felt the same way, it was almost like that stage persona and the excuse to get on stage was my outreach to get into that group of people that I cared about and wanted to be a part of, but I didn't fit in with that other part that they had. You know?
Right. Yeah, that actually makes sense. I mean, it's funny because a lot of my peers, and I mean, I'm so, like, I love that I get to be friends with all these hilarious, wicked, sassy. I mean, my favorite parts of doing like a drag show often are like sadly, Mother Couture, Lady Red, passed away this past week,
just
right? So
absolutely tragic and
so
unexpected.
Sad. So unexpected. We had heard that she was doing better, and so I've been going, down this sort of memory lane of these tours we did for the Drag Queens of Comedy. And I'm like, oh my God, that whole experience, all my memories, I can't remember what I did on stage, what I said on stage. Heclina and I had a bit, and Lady Red had a bit. I don't remember anything, but I remember all of this amazing stuff backstage. Like, just to be in a room and get to watch Lady Bunny scream at Lady Red Couture because Lady Red Couture ate her steak, like all these memories, and me and the Queen.
Did that actually happen?
Oh yeah, it happened. And Jackie B posted a video of it where Lady Bunny's screaming at Lady Red, going like, "You're not the only fat pig on this tour. I'm a fat pig too. You ate my steak." Like, really, like, so that stuff for me is like, I feel so blessed that I finally get to sit with the kids I admire.
Yeah.
And I could literally just sit in a dressing room and watch all those bitches, go at it. Coco Peru, Bunny, Bob the Drag Queen. I mean, they're the funniest people I've ever met,
Well, and you get to do,
right.
I mean,
I do feel that way with, somehow I put on this drag, I've gotten access to the dressing room, and now my friends are all these, smart, clever, funny people that I get to play with. And my social life, really does revolve around my work because of that. So, it's like, when people go, what do you do for social life? I'm like, honestly, a lot of it's just the work because, building a haunted attraction, hanging out with all those artists, all those weirdos, building a big drag show at the Castro Theater, working with choreographers and costume designers and hairstylists, like, those are my people, so my social life does kind of tend to be work related. And there's tons of drag queens that go out and party and want to be social and are very extroverted, but there's actually quite a few of us who actually just want to go home.
I think I mean, this was my experience. And also, there was an age limit to my willingness to go out and do things. My wife is 5 years younger than me, and there was probably 3 or 4 years in there where she's like, well, okay, well, I'm going to go. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
that sounds great. As long as we're okay with that, that's fine. Cause
Yeah.
I'm tired. I want to
Yeah.
go home. I want to watch a stupid TV show
Right.
and I just want to relax. And I totally hear what you're saying with sort of your social life revolves around your career. And I luckily gave up office work many moons ago because that's, for me, it was an unsustainable lifestyle.
Right.
But as a comedian, oftentimes people are surprised. They're like, oh, wasn't that great when somebody else came off? And I'm like, I wasn't watching. Not that I didn't want to see their material, but I'm in the
Right.
green room talking to 4 comedians who are
Right.
hilarious.
Right.
Like, I can't pull myself away. That's
Yeah.
my time. That's what I look forward to.
Yeah.
Like I joke that Zoom shows are terrible because if I bomb, I can't get free, French fries. I
Right.
have to make them myself. It's like a double whammy, but
Yeah.
it's really that I don't get to see anyone. I don't get that social feeding. Like the rest of my life is watching and reviewing films and writing. And that's such a typically personal solo venture that the rest of it is absolutely wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think most of us that are, sick of the, not being able to go back to work, it's as much about the disconnectedness of, this experience. If actually, it's probably more about that than anything,
Mm.
because, and I don't think socially distant, well, whatever, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But like, even when they do figure out how to reopen Broadway and things like that, like, it's going to be, it's not going to be the same,
Right.
until, there's a vaccine or, we put this behind us. In fact, part of me is just kind of like, why bother,
Right. Well, I mean, there's the whole like, you'll hear people say things, especially on like conservative talk shows and radio and stuff, which is like, well, we'll all be immune eventually. Well, yes, that's probably true. We're just trying to prevent the death of the thousands of people that it will take to get there first.
Right.
And, the vaccine trials right now, we're all hopeful, but most of us, I think, honestly, are not stupid about it. It's not going to be perfect. I still get the flu sometimes and I get that shot every year.
Right.
But I, for one, am so looking forward to digging through someone else's discarded crap. I can't even say it.
Yeah.
Because I know I've kept you on forever. What's your next? Do you have anything? I know you've got some things in the works, but I also know that as a performer, and you mentioned it too, money dries up.
Yeah.
Like I am an English professor, and that's sort of the saving grace for me. But for drag performers especially, I know there's a lot of benefit shows going on, but what can we as partakers in your guys' entertainment, what can we do to help?
Well, I mean, everyone's getting really creative. On Friday night, believe it or not, I'm going to do a thing where I deliver people's meals as
Meals on Heels.
Heels on Wheels. Wait, is that it? No, Meals on Heels. Whatever it is, I'm doing that. Jacqueline has talked me into it, and I'm looking forward to it because, well, one, we're all figuring out what to do, but also because I haven't actually like done anything in drag in person outside of like my apartment in a while.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be kind of fun to be out in the world again as Peaches. And I think we're still figuring it out. I mean, I know for me, because I juggle all these different kind of mediums and work in different ways, I've kind of shifted gears and thought, okay, the first thing that could probably open realistically is our immersive attraction. So that's not going to happen this Halloween, but let's write the show, get it up and running, and if we open it in the spring, who gives a shit? It doesn't have to be around Halloween.
No.
So, working on that kind of stuff, so that when we are ready to reopen something indoors, but also looking at the fact that like, well, okay, all of the mandates pretty much everywhere allow for outdoor things.
Right.
So, what would it take to create an outdoor cinema or an outdoor cabaret space,
Mm-hmm.
and who do I know that can help me do that? So I've been working on that. And yeah, I mean, I think, if you really are like, oh, I want to support Peaches, what's your Venmo? I'm really uncomfortable with that. Like, I feel
I
like
think a lot
I
of
don't
people
know.
are.
Yeah, like I'm like, I don't want you to just send me money, but you can book me on Cameo, to send you
Cameo's a great option,
send you a personal message or whatever. And like you say, my gift shop and all of that stuff needs to be, it's woefully outdated. It needs to be put back
I especially want, not only of course All About Evil, but I am super selfishly wanting you to put out a compilation of all your short films, because there are some, especially like your graduation short film that you reference, and I think the Wig and a Prayer story. Like I don't, you just can't find those. And I've seen images of what looks like you at one point had a DVD collection of them.
Yeah.
And it is so far gone that there's no way to find that.
Yeah, I think what we'll do. So, All About Evil it's looking like it'll be streaming soon.
Right.
They're negotiating now, and then there's even talk of a Blu-ray,
Awesome.
which would be exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes from that. And then like I have a comic anthology that came out last year, but it's called Theater of Terror. And it's 33 different queer comic artists. It's a anthology, but it sold out. The first run sold out. It was amazing. Like, we didn't expect it. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing where the publisher is getting another run going on that. Hopefully we'll have that online soon.
Excellent.
So I think, and then merchandise stuff, it's just we've been selling stuff at the events for so long, like concert t-shirts and things, that no one's just kind of gone in and taken inventory of what we have. Merchandise is tough. Like, a lot of people think that you make a lot of money on merchandise. You don't really. No. It's tough. No. You have to sell a lot of it for, the amount of work it takes. I like it just because I think it's obnoxious and fun.
I love it. Yeah. And well, and I think like we mentioned, sort of having the physical piece of what you love is great. And here at Colton Classic Podcast, I've been in this game a long time, but this is a relatively new podcast, and we just got our Patreon up. And when we looked at what can we give people, well, $1 a month, great. You get the videos, you get extra video content, maybe an extra episode, cool things like that. But if you give us $5, we do a custom trading card every month and send it to you with the artist signature.
That's
$10,
great.
we do a new zine for you every month. And it is great. And I absolutely think I want people to do it. It's patreon.com/Colton Classic Podcast. But also, like you said, it's totally selfish. I do that stuff anyway. So I'm totally happy to share that with the world and get our guests in on it and things like that. And I will say that for being a guest on the show, we will also be sending you the first print run, a copy of our first trading card signed by the artist, who just happens to be me. And
thank you.
Of course. But thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome. I've wanted to talk to you since I saw All About Evil, and we'll have to chat again at some point. I definitely want stories from Dela and Jinx and Alaska and Fifi and all the wonderful and crazy people that you work with.
For sure.
Well, listeners, as always, catch us every Tuesday. Make sure you follow Peaches Christ at, is it thepeacheschrist.com? Or
The Peaches Christ on Instagram, and Peaches Christ on Facebook and Twitter, and peacheschrist.com.
Great. So make sure you follow Peaches Christ. Joshua, thank you so much. Like I said, playing us off with All About Evil by the Chud. Hope you like it.
All About Evil.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Colton Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit coltonclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.